want to tell you guys like how I ran into this because it was around this time last year. Ironically, what's today? June 12th?
12.
So it was June 15th, right? So I ran into it initially in January. It just like popped up. I was like looking up some fitness stuff, and then the company Dragon Door that made this like showed up like, you know, sponsored, blah blah blah. You know, when they're trying to advertise
all that
for anything. And I was like, what is that? So it was like this dude, guy on the book right there, like doing this chain thing. I was like, what is that? So I clicked on it. I read it for like 2 seconds, and I'm gonna go on about my business. It shows up a couple weeks later. I'm like, huh, okay. So now I'm clicking a little bit more, and I scroll down and I see Bruce Lee using it, the old one. I was like, okay, well, I'm interested a little bit.
Very nice.
A little bit. So I read a little bit more, come back. Now they have a whole article on it. So there were people that were what's called advocates, so gold, silver, and bronze advocates. I just managed to make the silver last year after they took like half a year to sell me on this. So after that, I'm like, all right, this is $4.99.
Bruh.
I'm like, so keep in mind, pandemic, people are not trying to do personal training. I'm like, oh, do I click it? Oh my God, damn, well, hopefully I get some clients next week because they, you know what I mean? But after getting it, so it was on back order because of COVID delays. So I ended up getting it all the way in October, June to October. Now you'll get it in 3 days if somebody orders it now. But what grabbed my attention was the claims that they were making. So I mean, these are some strong claims. One of the claims that they were saying was you can double your strength in 5 months, which I was like, there is no freaking way to double your strength. So if somebody is struggling to pick up 100 pounds in 5 months, they're picking up 2. That takes well over a year. A claim like that, I'm like, what the hell? And then they were talking about what's called isometric hypertrophy, so you can get big with it too. And I'm like, you can't get big, guys. You can't get big. Who are you talking about? Like, come on. So I'm still reading. I'm like skeptical, but / open-minded because I mean they're putting themselves out there, like promoting their products. So I'm like, all right. So after that, I'm like, you know what? They said 1 year money back guarantee. If it's a piece of shit and they were lying to me the whole time, I'll just get my money back. So, all right. Y'all know about planks, wall sits, and like 6 inches and stuff like that. So that's a variation of isometric training called yielding isometric training. So essentially, when you're doing a wall sit or you're just doing a squat hold like we did at the boot camp today, over time, gravity is trying to push you into the ground. So you're using your muscular force to stay still. After a while, your legs are going to be like this, and that's your muscles contracting. There's no movement. That's called a static contraction. So yielding is the form of isometric training that we're all used to. We've all seen that on TV. We've seen it at the gym. People maybe doing bicep curls and they're keeping the one arm the same, and that burn is wicked. That's what that is. That's called isometric training. Isometric training is nothing new at all. I mean, that's been around for decades, well before gyms were established. In fact, it was like one of the primary ways to gain strength back in the day before there were gyms. So a lot of like the bodybuilders of the day, they were called old-time strongmen. A lot of people look at them as like freaks. Yeah. So they were just like, man, why is that guy so muscular? You know what I mean? This is great. It's like 1905, and you know, like everybody's like, you know, we don't work out, we just eat. You know, like, and we just walk and just do stuff. So it wasn't really a culture yet. So when you guys see like those movies, the Japanese movies where they're like horse stance, and they're just holding stances for hours. That's isometric training. That's how they were so strong back in the day. I was just like so fascinated with that. And that's just yielding. So this iso training uses what's called overcoming isometric training. So overcoming isometric training is just absolutely freaking wild. I have to show you guys this real quick. Iso chain. Just gonna pass that around. I was like, does anyone else find it odd that I don't know how tall he was, like 5'3" or something like that, that a small 5'3", now granted he was in condition, like he's 135 pounds and he's launching people across the room. And it's like, I know bigger people that are like 6'4" and they can't do that. Like, and they're huge. I mean, I'm not like huge. Muscle and Fitness magazine, like, look at those freaking quads. He will kill somebody huge. And they cannot do that. So I'm like, where, like, so I'm like looking this up. I'm like, somebody has to have the answer. It's YouTube, it's 2020. You know, somebody has to have the answer to that. And every time somebody like thumbnail clickbait you into a video, they always danced around the topic. So I was like, y'all don't know nothing either. Y'all can't figure it out either. So y'all wasted 10 minutes of my time. Y'all don't know why he was able to do that. That's why. Isometric training. It was the overcoming style of isometric training. So the yielding was holding a contraction, gravity is pushing against you, you're holding it for time. Overcoming is what's called pushing or pulling against an immovable force. So if I'm trying to push this car, it's almost 3,000 pounds, and you're pushing against the vehicle. Right now I'm pushing with everything I got. That's called overcoming isometric training. It will not move, but I'm throwing 100% of my energy into it. So that's what they used to do back in the day, like people pushing against trees, and it looks so bizarre now that we have access to all this tech and all this weightlifting, all this exercise science. So, you know, that was one way to, and it does work, it still works, but the only problem with that, it was the lack of what's called loading reflex. So loading reflex is essentially a feedback mechanism saying, hey, you're not pushing hard enough, or is this hard enough? So in the 1960s, there was a guy, Joe Weider. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him, Joe Weider. So he created what's called I call on the YouTube channel the OG ISO chain, the original ISO chain. So it's literally the bar and chain device that you just saw Bruce Lee using. So he sold them, they sold out. Everybody was using it. It was strength that they could feel, and they were just like, oh shit, well, this works. Did you get that ISO chain? I don't know if it was called ISO chain or it was just called bar and chain device or whatever they called it back then. But everybody was doing it. They could feel it. They could feel their muscles denser. They could see tone. But then, like, just as meteoric as it climbed up, it dipped just as fast because they didn't know how much energy to put into it. They're just like, I feel it working, but okay, that's cool. You know, how long do I hold it for? How many days a week do I do this? How many sets and reps? Do we even know what sets and reps are back then? You know what I mean? Like, they don't know. So it's just like, it just as high as it went, it just crashed that much faster. So it tanked. So a lot of people remember that. And so when Dragon Door came out with the ISO chain, they're like, oh, my dad did that back in the day. And you know, you can just make one for Home Depot for 40 bucks. And I wanted to I had it, it's in the freaking living room and I didn't bring it. But I made one. So what I did was last year around like March, right when the pandemic was full force, everything shutting down, I'm just like, yo, I'm gonna just go to Home Depot. It's about 40, 45 bucks, made everything. It's on the YouTube channel, so it's 2 planks, and it's literally without a spring, a snap, the chain, and a bar, only there's no tech on it. And so you can do all the variations of exercise, the front squat, the bicep curl, the shoulder press, overhead tricep extension, the rows on the floor, all that stuff. You can do that, but I ran into a problem real quick. One, all that force was bending the bar. Over time, it didn't happen right away. And 2, I didn't know how long. So with fitness, there's something called progressive overload. So you guys know about progressive overload. Have you heard of progressive overload before? So essentially, it's just like, hey, whatever I did yesterday, Friday, I'm gonna try and beat that today, Saturday. A real simple, they're just being technical with the terms. This is just be better than you were yesterday. That's all progressive overload is, just in fitness jargon. So essentially, if I did 3 sets of 10 on the bicep curl at 15 pounds yesterday, I'm gonna try and beat that in some way. Whether it's reduce the rest time, whether it's increase the weight to 20 pounds, whether it's go in a pyramid set and go 10 reps for one, 12 for the middle set, 10 for the third, or just go 12 reps, that's progressive overload. As long as someone practices the principles of progressive overload, with fitness, they will always be progressing. Their body will change. If they don't and they just work hard and do the same exercise all the time, this time next year they will look exactly the same because they didn't stimulate their body for a growth response. Does that make sense? So it's really interesting, and that was the problem with the old school isometric training. It's just like, we know it's working, but how the hell do we, how do we like increase, like what, we could hold it for 6 seconds, now we hold it for 7, and then 8, you're gonna run out of time. Now we're out here just wasting time. This is so stupid. Let's just go lift weights. Right. Or just do like bodyweight calisthenics. So when they dropped this and they were like, yo, we have a whole what's called dynamometer. Has anybody heard what a dynamometer is before? So a dynamometer is essentially a force gauge. You'll see that in like a lot of industrial places where like you'll have like the crane hook and then like a big ass piece of like, I don't know, like cargo or whatever. And it's measuring how much weight that is. So it's like whether it's like 2,000, 3,000 pounds, you can get a low grade one for at least $1,000, at least. Like the heaviest ones are up to 50 grams. So in order to measure accurate forces with the human body, because we are capable of some crazy feats, as I'm about to show you with this stuff, which doesn't even make any sense looking at it right now. But like, the dynamometer would need to be strong enough to hold all the human contractile forces that we're able to generate. So this handles up to 1,000 pounds of force, which is just perfect. I mean, ultimately, I think they're gonna make a ISO Chain Pro for like the crazies, like, you know, Eddie Hall and freaking Larry Wheels, and I know y'all probably see this a couple years from now, but y'all be on it. Y'all be on it. It'll probably be because of y'all that there is one. But it's gonna be totally wild. But for now, honestly, 999 is pretty damn good. So overcoming isometrics is the more powerful of the two. So this uses what's called absolute strength. So have you guys ever heard of what's called 1RM or 1 rep max before?
Yes.
Okay, so 1RM, just as a reminder, is how much weight you can lift up one time. You can't get it a second time. So if you're deadlifting and your max is 500, like that, and that's it, dude. You're spent. You do not have another one. That's your 1 rep max. Your 1 rep max for deadlift is 500 pounds. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's what's called dynamic lifting. Dynamic weightlifting or dynamic exercise is exercise that we all know, that we've known for the last 4 or 5 decades, I think, where we're moving. There's movement involved. So that's your calisthenics, where it's body weight. Your plyometrics, like Shaun T's bullshit. You know, no offense, man, but you crazy though. You know, weightlifting, that's all dynamic movement. But yeah, so then there's static. So now the static version of 1RM is called AS, which stands for absolute strength. That's what this is all about. So when you pull on here, your absolute strength is the number that shows up. So your absolute strength number is always going to be higher than your 1 rep max, because it's not gonna move. There's no movement. So you're pushing or pulling with everything you got, but it won't move. This is the maximum amount of strength that your body can generate, and it's recording it. That by itself is huge. That is worth every penny, worth its weight in gold, let alone all the functions I'm about to tell y'all. Like, it's wild, yo. So another factor with this is breaking down into the dynamic and the static is what's called concentric, eccentric, and isometric. So this is all about isometric. So concentric is like, bicep curl is like the easiest like demo. I do it in like all my videos. So like bicep curl, the concentric phase of the lift is from here to the top. That's the concentric. The eccentric, which is the return to beginning, is here. And isometric hold with the bicep curl is here. There's no movement. And over time, it's gonna burn. If y'all ever held grocery bags for a while, that should burn. You know what I mean? So that's the difference here. So it's all about static contraction. There was actually a study, University of London. If I'm not wrong, there's a video on it. Sue me, okay? So what they did, I got it from that book. So what they did was they did a test group, right? This is freaking wild. So the leg extension that you guys know from the gym. So they did a test group. One study, it was just one leg, and the other leg was just trained normally. The one leg for test group A just did it the way that we all know, which is dynamic movement in the gym. So boom, you know, reps, sets, all that stuff. Test group B did it isometrically, so they held it for time. After a 12-week study, the strength for the isometrically trained group was way higher, almost 3 times higher than the concentric and eccentric phase. The hypertrophy, so how big did the leg get? So the dynamic one won, so the concentric one won, the isometric one was right there. It was right there. And then the eccentric one, which is the focusing on the return, came in dead last. I mean, it wasn't even close. So that right there just tells us like that's how powerful isometric training is. You can get big with that. You can get big. But there's just not a lot of study because it doesn't look cool. What looks cool? Somebody like holding a wall sit or somebody squatting 365 for 10 reps and like struggling like, you know what I mean? Like that's the macho, that's the macho lift. It depends, but more often than not, more people like would agree with that. For me, it's whatever. It's neither here nor there as long as you can move it. But like my point is this, like that looks better to the masses. So this is just like, okay, well, you're just staying static. But honestly, I don't really care in emotions. I'm sure other people might feel the same. I'm a numbers guy. Are my numbers gonna be higher? Am I gonna be stronger? Am I gonna be bigger? Are we gonna get stronger? Is this a waste of time? Is this bullshit? Is this the real deal? But there's
You've never seen me work out then. I don't do that.
So
let's wait.
There's two things with the iso chain. One is called Hebb's rule. I think I mentioned this to you before. It's Hebb's rule: muscle fibers that wire together fire together. So this teaches you to access the hard to reach muscle fibers called the type 2 muscle fibers. They are really difficult to reach. I mean, it usually takes years to get up to that point because usually we're working out the slow twitch muscle fibers when we weightlift or do calisthenics. Plyometrics, we're starting to dip into the type 2 muscle fibers because it's a lot more explosive movement, getting deeper into the muscle fibers. But this one, it goes right into it. It goes right into it. So if you're teaching your body to contract maximally at 100%, you're creating new neural pathways so that when you go back to weightlifts, you're gonna train how you were on here. So when you perform that movement, boom, now you just got so much stronger. There's actually a video that I'm gonna release a couple weeks from now, which is instantly get 20% more on your weightlifting in a couple seconds. Which is, again, just, what? Like that makes no, I've never heard of that before. And I've been lifting for 12 years. The strength, the hypertrophy, and another lift that's called endurance. So for strength, everybody knows this, that you guys have seen iso chain before. 6-second contractions they found is the most optimal time frame for it. So 6 seconds contraction with everything you got. If you want to go for strength and size, you go for 20 seconds. And if you want to go for hypertrophy, which is getting swole, you want to go from 20 to 45 seconds. That sucks. That burns. We've just had you on strength, Ron. Oh my God, you haven't done a hypertrophy lift on here, man. My forearm almost locked up the one day.
I saw that in your video.
Oh yeah, man, like, oh my God. And then the endurance lifts, it's wild. So the endurance lifts are from 1 to 2 minutes. So for 1 to 2 minutes, what you're doing is you're performing a lift at 20% of your max. How do you find your max? Do a strength lift. You have the number right there. Perfect. For the hypertrophy, 60 to 85%. How do you find that number? Do a strength lift. Boom, done. Now you have that number, so just take the calculator. Let's say it's bicep curl 100 times 0.6 or times 0.85, whatever that new number is, 60 or 85 pounds of force. You hold that for 20 to 45 seconds. The main catalyst for getting big is time under tension. Was it fatigue? Was your muscle fatigue? If you're not walking out of the gym and your muscles are fatigued, what did you do? So it has to be fatigue. You gotta be limping out of there. Obviously with not like major injuries, but just like there should be nothing left. Your muscle fibers should be completely shredded to stimulate a growth response like that. And that's exactly what that does. Way better than any other exercise I've had is dealing with hypertrophy. To this day, I mean, that burns.
I feel like that when I work out with you.
What, with the hypertrophy?
No, I just, yeah, like not being able to walk after the gym. When
I work out beside him. I feel the same way.
I watch the videos.
I know, right?
So I want you guys to come close real quick. I'm gonna show you guys some of the modes. So all you do is turn the unit on real quick. So you can set it to pounds. You can press this, the kettlebell thing, it'll go to kg. We in America though, no pounds. What you do first is it goes through what's called this loading ring here. So once you pull up on it, see that? So right now I'm pushing around 35 pounds of force. Mainly in my shoulder just because of the odd angle that I'm pushing that. So let's just say that we want to figure out what was the highest I just pushed. Just hit max. 38 pounds of force. So that's great for like your strength lifts. If you're really trying to beat a sticking point in the gym where it's just like, dude, my bench is good, but I just can't get past this point. Max mode. That's what you need to do. Okay. If you're going for more of a hypertrophy or just working on your muscular endurance, how long can the muscles last? So just think like marathon runners or swimmers that they need their muscles to last throughout X amount of time. Use average mode. So now you just hit average. It's about 27 pounds of force on average for that little lift there. So if you're like, okay, man, if I were training a marathon runner, I'd probably have them on what's called the Zercher squat on here, or the front squat and the calf raise. And I wouldn't even train them with the strength lifts for the 6 seconds. I train them exclusively endurance. So 1 to 2 minutes. So they'd be holding it, and then we'd find out what their average is. The next time that we come in, we use progressive overload. So we try and beat that number. So it's like, okay, for a minute, we average around 27. We need to be at 30 next time. That way you're gonna kill it in a marathon because your legs won't get tired.
Everything we did was a 6 seconds.
Just 6, just strength only.
The AARP.
Yeah, the
Exactly.
so if you ever wanted to clear it out, just hit average again. Goes back to 0. Let's just say that we pulled a 27 and we want to beat that. This is like progressive overload 101. Getting better at lifting 101. You have to be what you did before. So now you just go hit load mode, right? So this is load mode. See that L? Now you just hit this arrow. And you go down to 27 pounds of force. Let's just say 30. So it's gonna blink twice. 1, 2 set. Now it's at 0, 0. If you ever like forget, it's like, hey, did I set it? You could just hit the up arrow again. There it is. It'll blink once, it'll blink twice. And it's set. So now, this right here, what I'm about to show you is why it's worth the money. Right here. Okay. So you push up against it, hear the sound. So every second you hear that beat, that means that you're above the amount of force that you just pushed.
So you're above 30.
That is worth everything, because up until now there was no way to gauge like strength and beating it with isometric, especially overcoming isometric training. Like there was none ever. Like this is literally a pioneer device. There was never a way to do that until this came out. That's why I'm just like, yo, who came up with this crap, yo? So, and that's like when the right person really finds out what this is, they will be everywhere. You can also do it with time. This is, you saw the video. Oh my God, I hate time mode, but it's so good. All right, so time mode. All right, so I'm gonna set it to 30 pounds. You'll blink once, you'll blink twice. Now you hold time mode. So the ISO train is automatically default set to 6 seconds for strength. So you can hit up 20. I'm just gonna do 20. I ain't trying to die right now. So, yeah, 20-second hold. I'm gonna have y'all try this too. Alright? The one where it was like the long beep at the end of 2 seconds, that's letting you know that it's done. Oh my gosh. So the max contraction there, 88 pounds. The average when you're doing time modes like this, you wouldn't do that. 68 pounds. You always want to be, when you're doing time mode, average mode is pretty much what you're trying to do.
You're a trained professional, so we'll make that very clear when you sign the waiver.
So what I just demoed there was a mix of strength and hypertrophy, so that's 20 seconds. Hypertrophy is straight up 45 seconds. Brutal. Endurance, that's where I locked up my forearm, because when I train in the gym, I'm usually on average like a strength lifter. So I usually do like high weights, low reps. So my muscle fibers for years are used to lifting heavy. They're not used to holding contractions.
Right.
So when my forearm locked up, my muscles like, what are you doing? We don't train like this. Yo, and it was literally like I was stuck like this. I couldn't even.
Saw the video.
Yeah, I had to like audibly tell the GoPro to. It'll stop. But yeah, it was completely wild. So I want you guys to try it.
Ladies first. Ladies first.
Oh my gosh, I'm the only